She arrived on a Tuesday. She had told him Monday. He had stayed up all of Sunday night preparing, reorganizing equipment, recalibrating readouts, running 3 separate diagnostic checks on the field alignment that absolutely did not need 3 separate diagnostic checks. He would not have admitted any of this. She knocked on the warehouse door at 7:43 in the morning with a bag over one shoulder and 2 coffees in her right hand, and the specific expression of someone who has been awake since 3 a.m. on a plane and considers this a completely reasonable way to travel. She walked past him, set the coffees on the nearest work table, and looked at the device. She looked at it for a long time. Not the polite look of a visitor, the real look. The look of a scientist encountering something they want to understand from every angle simultaneously. She said, not to him, not quite to herself, in the precise middle ground of a person thinking out loud, "It's smaller than I expected." Cicero said, "It's not finished." She said, "I know. That's what's interesting." Her name was Dr. Saya Orin, 26 years old, Japanese Kenyan, a xenobiologist, which is the study of biological systems that do not yet exist, or that exist somewhere we have not yet found. She had chosen that field at 19 because, she had told Cicero when they met at a conference 18 months earlier, it was the only science that required you to take seriously the possibility that everything you thought you knew about life was merely the local version. He had looked at her across the conference table and said, with the complete sincerity of someone who almost never paid compliments, "That is a very good reason." She had said, "I know." They had not spoken again for 6 months. Then he had sent her his dissertation without explanation. She had sent back one sentence. "When do you start building it?" That was the beginning of this. The first 3 days were an argument. Not the hostile kind, the productive kind. The kind where 2 people disagree about everything and arrive somewhere better than either of them could have gotten alone. She thought his energy alignment was wrong. He thought his energy alignment was right. She proved he was wrong on the 3rd day, using a methodology borrowed from how bioluminescent organisms regulate their internal light production, a biological parallel to quantum field coherence that Cicero had never encountered and would not have thought to look for. He looked at her proof for a long time. Then he said, "Where did you find this?" She said, "Deep-sea ctenophore research, 2058. Published in a marine biology journal that I'm fairly certain no physicist has ever read." He said, "I would have found it eventually." She said, and in her voice was the specific warmth of someone who is choosing not to win an argument they have clearly won, "Of course you would have." The device took shape, day by day, component by component. The ring frame that had been half-assembled for weeks became fully assembled. The crystal alignment nodes, which Cicero had been sourcing from 3 separate specialist suppliers and had been waiting on for 11 days, arrived, and Saya spent an entire afternoon calibrating each one individually with a precision that Cicero watched from across the warehouse and did not interrupt, because some work requires the silence of respect. She had brought things he had not thought to have: biological monitoring equipment, sensors designed to measure how living tissue responds to unusual energy fields. This was her contribution to the question he had not yet thought to ask. Not just whether the field could be created, but whether a living body could survive inside one. A temporal bubble that kills everything inside it is not a very useful machine, she had told him on her 2nd day, while setting up the monitoring array. He had said, "I was planning to address biological compatibility in Phase 3. She said, "We're going to address it in Phase 1, because if we don't, Phase 3 will be a memorial service." He had not argued with this, which, for Cicero, was itself a kind of compliment. He called his sister on a Thursday evening. Mira was 19. She was studying at a university in Addis Ababa, education science she wanted to teach, and she called him every 2 weeks with the regularity of someone who has decided that the frequency of contact matters more than its depth. He usually answered. This time, she called him.
Good. I told everyone at school my brother is going to change how physics works. They thought I was being dramatic.
You were being accurate.
Call me when it works. I will.
Day 41. The device was ready for its first real test. Not the full temporal displacement, not yet. The first test was simpler. Could the field generator produce a stable, localized temporal bubble at all? Could it create a space, however small, however brief, where time moved differently than it did outside it? Saya had prepared the biological monitoring equipment. Cicero had prepared the object that would go inside the bubble, a small orange. He had chosen it deliberately, an organic object with measurable biological activity, cellular decay that proceeded at a known rate, something alive in the sense that living things are alive even after they have been separated from the tree. Saya looked at the orange when he placed it on the platform. Of all the objects in the world, you chose a piece of fruit. It has predictable cellular decay. It is an ideal biological marker for temporal displacement. You could have just said it was convenient. It was also convenient. She had smiled at this. One of the small smiles she gave when he was, in her estimation, attempting humor and succeeding more than he realized. The test ran at 11:14 in the morning. Cicero at the primary control station, Saya at the biological monitoring array, the orange on the test platform, perfectly centered in the ring of the displacement field generator. The field generator hummed to life, a new sound in the warehouse, different from the equipment sounds of the past weeks, lower, more present, a sound that seemed to come from the air itself rather than from any specific machine. The readings climbed. Cicero watched them, composed, precise. Every variable tracked and registered simultaneously. This was what he looked like when he was doing what he was built to do. A stillness that was not the stillness of calm, but the stillness of absolute focus. Saya watched the biological monitors and said quietly, "Field is stable, cellular decay rate on the target." She stopped. "Cicero," he said without looking up. "I see it." The orange was not aging. Inside the temporal bubble, inside the small, impossible, mathematically certain space that the machine had created around it, the orange simply held. The world outside moved forward. The orange did not. 32 seconds. At 32 seconds, the field collapsed, power draw exceeding what the generator could sustain. The bubble closed. The orange sat on the test platform, unchanged, identical to itself at the moment the test began. The warehouse was very quiet. Cicero stood in front of it for a very long time, not checking readings, not making notes, just standing. Saya, across the warehouse, did not speak. She understood, And this was one of the fundamental things about her. She understood that this was not her moment to fill. He had spent 19 years asking a question and building a mathematics around the answer. And now the mathematics had decided to be visible. The orange sat on the platform, not older than when he had placed it there, not younger, just exactly itself, held, kept, like something that had been loved enough to be preserved. He said, and his voice was quieter than Saya had ever heard it. "It's there." She said, "It's there. Time is a lock." And we just touched the key. They worked through the rest of the day in a state that neither of them named, but both of them felt. The specific electricity of a proof becoming real. Every variable analyzed, every reading checked and cross-checked. Saya ran the biological data through 4 separate frameworks. The cellular decay differential was exactly what the mathematics predicted, within a margin of 0.3%. Cicero rebuilt the power supply while she analyzed. Fast. Faster than usual. The kind of speed that comes not from rushing, but from knowing exactly what needs to happen next. The second test ran at 4:51 p.m. The field held for 47 seconds before collapsing. The third test ran at 7:12 p.m. 1 minute, 11 seconds. Each test, the orange unchanged inside it. Each test, the world continuing outside it. 2 different rates of time in the same room. By the fourth test, 9:30 p.m., Saya was sitting on the warehouse floor, back against a work table, monitoring equipment in her lap, eating a sandwich she had produced from her bag at some point in the last hour without either of them particularly noticing. She said, around a bite of the sandwich, "You know what this means?" "Tell me what you think it means."
It means every assumption humanity has made about the nature of time for the last 400 years was the correct answer to the wrong question. He looked at her. They were asking, what is time? The right question was, what is time doing? And the answer is, it's running a program, and you just found the pause button. A long silence. That's a very imprecise way to describe it. I know, I'm a biologist. We specialize in imprecision that turns out to be true. 3 weeks later, the device had improved considerably, not just in sustained field duration, though that had grown from 71 seconds to 4 minutes and 38 seconds, an improvement that Saya had marked in her notebook with 2 underlines and the word significant in block letters, which, from Saya, was the equivalent of anyone else standing on a table and cheering. The more important improvement was in precision. Cicero had begun to understand the topology of the temporal field, not just how to create it, but how to shape it, how to direct the differential, how to make time move faster inside the bubble instead of slower, how to, in principle, run the mathematics in reverse. He had not told Saya what he was working toward, not because he didn't trust her, because some things you need to be certain of before you say them out loud. Because saying them out loud before they are certain is a way of making them smaller than they are. He was almost certain. The test that mattered happened on a Wednesday morning. No ceremony, no preparation beyond what the work required. Saya arrived, poured coffee, looked at the equipment Cicero had been rearranging since 3 a.m. and said, "You reconfigured the directional array." "Yes." She was quiet for 20 seconds, the silence of someone reading an equation that is not written in numbers, but in the physical arrangement of machinery. "You're going to run it backward." "I'm going to attempt to run it backward." "What's the object?" He held up a pen, an ordinary pen, black ink, the kind that comes in boxes of 12 from any office supply store. "Why a pen?" It was the nearest thing to hand. She looked at the pen. She looked at him. The nearest thing to hand in a warehouse full of precision scientific equipment was a ballpoint pen? Yes. Okay, run it. He placed the pen on the test platform. He returned to the control station, made 3 small adjustments. Then he looked at Saya. She nodded once, the nod of someone who has checked everything that can be checked and is now simply ready to see what happens. He activated the field. The displacement generator hummed, the familiar sound, the sound the warehouse had learned over the past weeks, the way a room learns the sound of the person who lives in it. The field formed around the pen. The readings climbed. And then, before Cicero's hand had finished the sequence, before the field had fully stabilized, before the test had technically begun, the pen reappeared. Not appeared, reappeared. It was there, on the platform, solid and real, and exactly where it had been. And then the field completed its sequence, and the pen disappeared into the temporal bubble. 4.3 seconds later, the field released. The pen returned to normal time. It sat on the platform, completely unchanged. Saya was looking at the monitors. She said very quietly, "The pen existed on the platform at 2 distinct time coordinates simultaneously. For 4.3 seconds, this laboratory contained both the pen that was about to be displaced and the pen that had already been displaced." She looked up at Cicero. "It went backward." Cicero was still at the control station. He was looking at the pen. He had known this was what the mathematics predicted. He had known, with the complete conviction of someone who had spent 6 years building and proving the framework, that this was what would happen. But knowing something and seeing it are not the same thing. He had known his mother was going to die. He had known the dissertation committee would be skeptical. He had known Helix Corp would take what they could take. And he had known, with mathematical certainty, in the clean, precise language of equations that do not lie and do not comfort and do not soften anything. He had known that time was not what anyone thought it was. Knowing it and seeing it are not the same thing. He sat down on the warehouse floor, put his back against the control station, looked at the pen on the platform, and then, quietly, completely without warning, without performance, without any decision to do it. Not a small laugh, not a polite, controlled laugh.
The laugh of someone who has been carrying something enormous for 19 years and has just been allowed for the first time to put it down. It went on for a while. Saya watched him from across the warehouse. She did not laugh with him. She did not speak. She simply watched. The way you watch something you want to remember exactly as it is, because you understand instinctively that this specific version of this person may not be available again for a very long time. When it stopped, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, and his voice was different. Something had left it that had been there before, something tight and held,
something maintained at considerable effort for a very long time that had briefly, completely let go. "We need to increase the field radius." "I know. And the power supply needs to be redesigned. The current draw at 4.3 seconds is already approaching the generator's upper limit. For anything larger, for anything that could contain a human being, we need at least 12 times the current capacity." "I know. And we need to address the biological compatibility question for the reverse displacement specifically. Forward displacement in a temporal bubble is one thing. Sending living tissue backward through a temporal gradient." "Cicero?" "Yes?" "It's okay to take 10 minutes. A long silence. 10 minutes is a long time. "It's been 19 years. I think you can afford 10 minutes. He was quiet. Then he said, very quietly, "She would have wanted to see this." He did not say who. He did not need to. "I know. She sees it." The 10 minutes became 2 hours, not of rest. Neither of them rested well in spaces where there was work to be done, but of something else. Saya made more coffee, found a bag of food she had brought and forgotten, sandwiches, fruit, things that were the nutritional equivalent of an apology for not eating properly, and put them on the work table between them. They ate, they talked. They did not talk about the machine for 2 full hours. She told him about her first year of xenobiology, 3 months studying deep-sea organisms in the Mariana Trench, the specific terror and wonder of being that far underwater, the way her mind had reorganized itself around the concept that life found a way into every available space, regardless of what that space contained. He told her about his mother. He did not do this often. He did not do it easily. It came out in particular fragments, the way things come out when someone has held them for a long time, and they emerge not all at once, but in pieces, like light through a door that is only slightly open. She listened. She did not fill the silences with comfort. She simply stayed in them, which was rarer and better. When he finished, not with an ending, just with a stopping, the way these things stop, she said, "She asked you the right question." "What?" "Why can't we go back?" That was the right question. Most people who lose someone ask, "Why?" She asked, "Why can't?" One of those is grief. The other is physics. He looked at her. "I never thought about it like that." "No, you were 9. You were just answering her." They worked through the afternoon and into the evening. The device was disassembled and reassembled around a new power architecture. Cicero's design, Saya's biological coherence calibration integrated at every junction point. The work was fast, faster than either of them had worked alone. The specific acceleration of 2 minds that had found their rhythm together, where the gap between one person finishing a thought and the other picking it up had narrowed to almost nothing. Cicero designed, Saya questioned. Cicero revised, Saya tested. Cicero watched the test and revised again. Saya recorded. Cicero built. It had a momentum to it, the kind of momentum that is very easy to fall into and very difficult to see clearly from inside. Which is why neither of them noticed until later, much later, when Saya was packing up her equipment for the night and moving a storage case that had been sitting against the east wall since the week she arrived. Neither of them noticed it sooner. "Cicero?" He was at the whiteboard, without turning.
in a minute. Now! Something in her voice made him turn. She was crouched beside the storage case. She had moved it away from the wall, and behind it, wedged into the gap between the case and the baseboard, invisible from any angle unless you were directly behind it, was a device. Small, black, about the size of a thumb. Saya was looking at it with the careful, precise attention she gave to things she needed to understand completely before she reacted to them. Her voice was perfectly steady. "How long has that case been against that wall?"
Cicero came across the warehouse, crouched beside her, looked at it.
"Since before you arrived." "Since before you arrived in this warehouse? Or since I rented it?" He looked at the device. The device looked at nothing. It did not have eyes, but it had a microphone and a transmission array and a power cell rated for 14 months of continuous operation. It had been listening for a very long time. He did not touch it. This was the correct instinct. If he touched it, destroyed it, disabled it, whoever placed it would know it had been found. The gap in their data stream would be as loud as a confession. He stood up. He looked at Saya. She was reading his face with the same precision she applied to everything, and she saw what he was thinking, and she nodded once. "Correct." He said, very quietly, voice completely even. The voice of someone who has just discovered the room they are in is not the room they thought it was, and who does not intend to let that change anything visible. "Leave it." "How long do you think?" "Long enough." "Helix." Not a question. Neither of them needed it to be. "Yes." He looked at the device for a moment longer. Then he turned back to the whiteboard, picked up his marker, and said, at his normal volume, as if the last 2 minutes had not happened, "The power architecture revision. Let me show you what I'm thinking for the next phase." Saya looked at him. Then she picked up her equipment, walked to the whiteboard, stood beside him, and said, at her normal volume, "Show me." Later, after Saya had left, after the warehouse was quiet, after the lamp had burned down the hours toward midnight, Cicero sat at his desk. The pen that had traveled backward through time sat on the corner of the desk. He looked at it, picked it up. It was exactly what it had always been, a ballpoint pen, black ink, the kind that came in a box of 12. It had also been 4.3 seconds in the past. It had experienced something that nothing in human history had ever experienced, a controlled reversal of its position in time, a return, a going back. It looked completely unchanged. He set it down carefully. He opened his journal. He wrote the date. Then he wrote, Day 62. The pen went back. 4.3 seconds. Not enough to matter in any practical sense. Enough to prove that the direction of time is not a law. It is a habit. And habits can be broken. He closed the journal. He looked at the device across the warehouse, the machine that had today proved that the mathematics was real. Then he looked at the east wall, behind the storage case, the small black device that had been listening since before any of this began. He said, to no one, to the empty warehouse, to whoever was on the other end of that transmission array, quietly, certainly, without anger, I know you're there. I've known for longer than you think. and I want you to hear this clearly. You are watching the wrong thing. The machine is not what will change everything." He picked up the pen, held it between two fingers, set it down again. "The man building it is." Outside the warehouse, the Geneva night moved through its hours toward morning. In a building Cicero had never visited, in a room full of screens and cold electronic light, a man named Director Solon Pyke sat reading the day's transcripts. He read the transcript of everything said in that warehouse today. He read it twice. He read the part about the pen going backward through time. He read it a third time. He set the transcript down. He looked at his hands, steady, certain, the hands of a man who had made decisions of consequence before and who did not find the weight of them difficult. He said to the operative waiting quietly at the edge of the room, "Upgrade the priority on Varen." "To what level, sir?" "The kind that doesn't leave room for mistakes." And in the warehouse, Cicero was already at the whiteboard. The next phase had begun before the current one had fully ended. That was how he worked. That was how he had always worked. The finish line of one problem was the starting line of the next, and the gap between them was only as long as it took to pick up the marker. He wrote. The equations spread across the whiteboard in the precise, dense, beautiful shorthand of a mind that had been building toward this for 2 decades. On the desk beside him, the pen, the journal, Osei's key on its chain, and the orange, still in its test housing, still perfectly unchanged, still held at the moment before it would have begun to age. Just as his 9-year-old self had wanted, just as his mother had not been able to be. The lamp burned. The marker moved. The device waited. And somewhere in the quantum foam of the universe, in the thin places between seconds where probability had not yet collapsed into certainty, something that would eventually become the future was already deciding what it would be. He did not know yet what was coming for him. He only knew the equations. He only knew the work. And for now, for this one night in this one warehouse with a pen that had gone backward in time and an orange that had stopped aging and a girl who had said, "She sees it," about a woman who had been gone for 19 years. For now, that was enough. It would not always be enough, but tonight it was.